people would rather die than be wrong. But really, it's not about being wrong or being right. It's about being open. Art is the expression of your own personal discovery.
When you chit-chat about that which you find sacred, you diminish the power of your practice. You move out of the high frequency of experiencing and return to your personality's desire to impress.
I don't care who tells me I'm not. I'm communicating with that tree. I know I am. I can feel it.
Jocelyn Jones, you wrote a beautiful book called Artist, Awakening the Spirit Within, which I happen to have right here. Show everybody who is watching on video. One of the first things I noticed was your profound connection with trees and with nature in general. Where do you think that connection came from? It seems like you were drawn to them. Do you think that was
Oh,
for a specific reason, or what was that like?
well, it was a specific reason. I think I felt tremendously lonely. And, artists, and I consider myself an artist, they're high wired, they're highly sensitive. And so artists are the ones who say to me, "Oh, you talked about trees, and I have that connection with trees and nature." And, a lot of people say that, and they're all, I believe there's an artist in everyone, but, I think that's part of it. That connection is there for everyone, and my purpose in the book was to fine tune that frequency in people who seekers who wanted to live a life in coherence with their own heart. So I want people to learn how to listen to their heart, as I was blessed to hear the whispers of trees.
I was actually just listening to a podcast episode where someone was speaking about nature and trees. So it's great that we're even talking about this because I just happened to stumble upon this, and it was talking about the healing powers of trees. And I thought, I wonder if that had to do with Jocelyn's story. Maybe there's something consciously or unconsciously happening there, because apparently they have this healing power because they absorb the water and it goes up, through their roots into their bark. So even when you hear of people hugging trees, they inherently know of that life force right beneath the bark that they're essentially touching. And, trees produce fruit, and they have no other reason to do that but for us. They don't eat the fruit. So it's like they're here to help us.
They're a miracle. All plants regenerate, and that, flowers, and they die off. And I have friends who are like, "Oh, my flowers are dying." I go, "No, they're just in that season where they're going to feed themselves so that they can come back for you next year." And, if you think about trees and how old they are and how long they've been around, trees know a lot more about being trees than we know about being people. So they're living entities, and water is a living entity, and air is a living entity. I mean, air, if you meditate on air, if you think about what is air, it's a life force that literally brings us to life. We come to life on our first breath, but it's outside of us. It's something outside of us that we bring in. And so when you're in communication with air, you are in communication with spirit. So it's a practice. So when you meditate and you work with your breath and you breathe in, I know that I'm breathing out. You breathe out, I know that I'm breathing out. And you will think, you will have thoughts, and you will bring yourself back to your breath. You'll become aware. Oh, I'm thinking. Oh, I'm judging. Oh, I'm listing. We do a lot of listing. I have to do this and I have to do that, and judgment. And we become aware of that, which is a practice. And to become the person you want to be, you become aware of the things that you'd like to change. And then we come back to our breath. And that's like flexing a muscle, you know? So you can meditate with trees, you can meditate with nature. But, air is a constant. And water, the same thing. Water is, a force of life. It's a miracle if you look at water. I mean, it's clear. Nothing is like it. It's transparent, it's clear, it's refreshing. I don't know if you've ever seen, there's a wonderful documentary on water. And they took 3 containers. It's a scientific study. They took 3 containers of water, and they had the holiest people on the planet pray and focus that toward the first container of water. And the second container of water, they yelled at and they were mean and critical of. And the third container of water, they ignored. And which do you think was the best and worst off? Of course, the one they prayed over, they have cameras now that can film, take pictures of this, and it made crystals. It made these magnificent, like snowflakes. It makes, because it's water, snowflakes. It made crystals. It was like, thank you. It was in communication with the prayer, because that happens in the realm of spirit. And the one they yelled at had some, got a little black here and there and some gunk and was turbulent. And the one they ignored died. It was the worst shape and black. And so that's kind of how I felt as a child. I felt ignored and I didn't understand it because I was just a child. And, my parents weren't bad people. It was kind of, that was the way of the time. You put your kid on earth and said, okay, go. Whereas now we're just like every day we look at our children and our grandchildren and go, you're a miracle. I love you. You can do anything. which is uh, which is good and which we need on the planet. We need souls that have been supported in that way. And it is true, when you look at a baby and that's a miracle. So, excuse me, part of tuning in as an artist is to recognize and be grateful for the miracles, to be able to see that instead of walking by. When you admire a tree and you really admire the tree, go, oh my goodness, you're doing so well. I have this tree outside my apartment. I write about it, and I just got back from New York, and the first thing I do when I walk in the apartment is go tree, because she's just so big in there. And when you admire a tree, that may be the first communication they have ever received from a human being, but they receive it. You can believe it. So I'm very want to inspire people to reach for that communication that's very available to them.
And what a perfect time in our world to be doing that, because we are locked indoors and we're staring at screens and we are disconnected from the healing powers of nature.
Yes. And we're taking advice and being crushed by others, not even teachers. There's no teaching going on. There's no, it's very tragic. But teaching is a calling, and it's about inspiration. And what are we being inspired by? Instagram and TikTok, and people are really being inspired, taking their inspiration from that. So part of my mission with the book, and I do speaking, and I'm going back to teaching, is to inspire people to become in communication with their own heart. Because if we all did that, we would, evolve into a higher, where we're headed anyway. It's just a matter of how long it takes and how much damage we're going to do to the planet. The planet will survive. She's a being. She's much bigger than us. She'll just toss us at some point and say, well, that didn't work, did it? And move on. But I think we can do better. And I think if you taught, imagine if with little children, if you began in the kindergarten saying, what is interesting to you? What do you love? What resonates with you? That's what's important. Let's find out what that is. Let's give you more information about that, that you listen to the student about what they need. That's what a teacher, that's what I try to do as a teacher.
Yeah,
Because
definitely.
it's, they're all individuals, you know?
Hmm. Yeah. And those little hints, those little feelings of intuition are coming from somewhere. We need to listen to
Yeah.
them.
Yes. And to teach the difference, to
Hmm.
teach this is your monkey mind, and it's very good. We're not going to get rid of it. We need it. It's very helpful. It's just out of balance. It's just, we think it's so loud and chattery, chattery, chattery that we think we are. But when you meditate or when you look at your thoughts, then you have to say, from that point of awareness, who is looking at those thoughts? And that is a practice to, oh, that's my awareness. And that's where, the mind goes chatter, chatter, chatter. You should like Tommy, wear that dress and he'll love it. And the heart speaks in a very different way. It speaks in hunches, oh, I wonder if Tommy took this way home. And then you round the corner and there's Tommy. People say, oh, the universe. Well, you can amplify that help from the universe by amplifying your connection to your own inner awareness. And there are exercises you can do to, make that stronger. And that's what I try to do in the book.
Yes, I was going to say you have so many of them in the book and they're so good. So what I actually did was I notated some of my favorite little gold nuggets in here, and I thought it would be exciting to get to kind of go over a few of them with you. So in your book, you talk about thinking versus knowing and how they're two different things.
Yes.
And when I think of thinking, I imagine using the logical brain. And
Yes.
when I think of knowing, it feels more intuitive, like a deep understanding.
Yes.
Okay, so that's you
Yeah.
would agree.
I teach actors, and at a certain point, I give them technique and they play with the technique because really acting is like juggling. You have to learn the lines and you have to walk and talk and behave and you have to have inner life and inner thoughts of the character. So those are three things and they're like juggling and it takes them a while. And I have very specific exercises that help them do that. After they have that coordination, you want to work on the quality of their work. And the quality of their work depends on this impulse machine, this knowing. So I discovered in my teaching that I could get them to ask questions, and if they were in a certain state, they would have inspiration. They would go, "Oh, that's a great idea." And so then I could teach them, don't accept anything less than that hit, as we call it, that sense that, oh, that's scary or that's exciting or what is that? You know what I mean? That's a hunch, that's inspiration, that's knowing. And the more you rely on that and the more you encourage that and the more you practice that, the more you live with that.
You wrote here, once you think you know, you're done learning. Once you think you know, a door closes. Once you think you know, there is no more discovery. Once we file something away under, oh, I know that, a space closes. Love that.
That's channeling. I didn't write this book. I don't know who wrote this book. I read the book sometimes and I go, wow, thank you. Um, I wrote this book. Part of the reason I wrote the memoir pieces was that I wanted it to be more human than coming from on high, and teaching you just, they want to put you on a pedestal because they want to release their own responsibility. And so I'm always going, it's not about me. It's not about me at all. It's about what I can help in you. It's about you. Because that comes from the monkey mind. You think, and we're particularly right now on the planet, we're desperate to be right. We're comfortable when we think we know. Oh, I know. I got it. I got it. I'm educated, or I heard that, or I've been there before. I've got it. And people would rather die than be wrong. But really, it's not about being wrong or being right. It's about being open. Um, you can't feel that impulse that we were talking about of knowing in that quiet I feel this, not, you know what I mean? Knowing is a feeling, thinking is from your ego. The
Mm.
other is very quiet little certainty in self of, oh, I don't care who tells me I'm not. I'm communicating with that tree. I know I am. I can feel it.
Just like how you said it's channeling on some parts when you write this book,
Yeah.
that's exactly what I try to do before I start recording a podcast.
Mhm.
I don't want my brain to really be involved too much, obviously to an extent, but I pretty much open myself up and ask the universe to use me as a vessel.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's the only way, in my opinion. I mean, if you leave it up to me, it's not going to be as beneficial to the planet unless I hand it over to, higher guides.
Well, that's a beautiful connection you have and that you are cultivating. You not only have that about you as a being, or you have followed that impulse, but you now are well situated in it and are doing your podcast with a purpose, a real purpose. And once you are connected to your heart and a purpose and helping, you know, things just show up for you. The universe shows up for you. But that's because you're co creating with it. So, when people have real problems and issues come up in health, that's all co creating with the universe for the universe. There's a lesson in it. We are all exactly where we need to be to learn or to evolve to our next wisdom.
Oh, that is so true. And it's so hard for some people to hear when they're in
Oh,
the depths of pain and grief, but it's like those are the moments that are the most transformational, that are leading you to your purpose and to, why you're meant to be here.
yes, yes. Yeah, it's hard when you're in it, and we're also trained to victimhood. People want sympathy, and if when you accept victimhood, I'm a victim to this terrible thing that happened to me. How could I possibly be responsible for it? It came out of left field. It didn't come out of left field. The universe whacked you in the head with it. To learn that, you know, if you victimhood is not taking responsibility. And if you want to learn, you have to say, this is happening for a reason. Victimhood is giving it up. It's blaming, blame is another one. Blame and judgment, they're just the ego having a little fit. It's just like, this can't be, I have to protect myself. And this person did this thing, and I'm, so offended, and, taking this very victim stance as opposed to, well, maybe it's time that we not be friends for a while, or maybe I need to talk to that person about their sensitivity level, or maybe I need to take responsibility. Maybe I did something that brought that about, that's to if you don't accept the victim stance, there are all these other ways to learn from it. One is to examine it, one is to, walk away from it, one is to ask questions of it and interact with it. There's endless creative possibilities of how to live your life from heart as opposed from to ego. And the ego again is it's a brilliant invention, and we have these personalities, and we develop these personalities, and we use these personalities, and they're wonderful, and they get us love, and they get us attention, and they do all kinds of things for us as long as we can take a little step aside, like we do with our awareness when we look at, oh, I'm thinking of, oh, I'm being very judgmental of that person. Oh, I'm thinking, these weird thoughts. Oh, I'm worrying. Oh, I'm darkly imagining. Oh, I'm just daydreaming my brains out. This awareness is watching that. That awareness is what we question. That awareness is what looks and says, man, I feel like a victim. What's going on here? So we operate from that as opposed to that.
Objective observation of the present moment quiets the mind and expands our capacity for honest interest in all things outside of ourselves. It's how we learn. It's how we discover our own point of view as opposed to being shown or told what to think by others. You talked about your mother,
Mhm.
and you got to a point where you were able to objectively observe her and you saw her as being dramatic in a sense.
Well, she was frustrated. I don't, I'm sure there are a lot of people who have difficult relationships with family mothers, whether it's daughter and mother, father and son, daughter and father. We have these sometimes unfortunate roles that we get stuck in, patterns. And then, by the way, when you get to be my age, you see the thing you did not like in your parents come up in you. And you go, oh, I sound like my mother. And that's my mother's way of dealing with this with resentment. That's not, I want to change that so that again, the awareness looks and goes, this doesn't feel right. But my relationship with my mother was she was competitive and she was resentful and so we had these patterns, we'd go and we would cook together and rather it being a wonderful experience cooking together, she would direct me on how to cut the carrots the right way. It just became not fun. It's like it's sort of a way to enslave you instead of like, let's create these vegetables together. It was like, no, the best way to cut the carrots is like this. And if you did not cut them that way, she would get mad at you. And then as she got older, that kind of point of view on things and control of things made her more and more resentful and dramatic. She would get, upset about butter. It wasn't the right quality butter. The guy would send the order from the store, and she would take it personally that the guy who ran the store didn't know her well enough to pick the right butter. If someone gave her a gift that she did not like, which was 99.9% of all gifts given to her, she would be dramatic about it. Nobody knows me. They don't understand me. She had a very dramatic voice like that. I can't believe they would give me such a gift. It was just like, so one time I was home and she was kicking up her heels and she was really older at this point and just cranky about everything. And she was having a little bit of a fit. And I was standing in the kitchen really resenting her and this pattern of ours and my resentment of her that she could take no joy in the fact that I hadn't seen her in 6 months. And here I was in the kitchen. And couldn't we find some way of enjoying each other? And then I would resent her for being so dramatic, blah, 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 and having a fit. So I used my tools and I began to just observe her in the present moment without mind and all this thinking she was a bitch and thinking she was doing this to hatefully and all these negative thoughts I was having about her. I just watched her and suddenly everything shifted and I saw an old woman who was scared and knew that her years were limited and she was tired and she had had a lot of illnesses and a lot of operations and some hospital time and her body was tired and she was the reason that she was so dramatic about everything is that's how it fueled her. She was kicking up energy. I have to fight this thing and now look, I have energy. I was like, wow, look at that. I'd never thought of it before. It was a discovery. And so observation leads to discovery. And here's my definition for art. I looked for a lot of definitions of art because I wanted to give them to my students. Oh, here's a great definition of art. And I couldn't find any really. So I created my own, which is that art is the expression of your own personal discovery. If you don't have this kind of observation and discovery, you have nothing personal to express. It's going to be something that somebody else has expressed and you thought was great. Um, so this is why I'm so glad you brought that up. I think this exercise along with meditation, this is a meditative exercise, is to observe things and observe, artists, painters, if they're looking at a tree, they don't look at the leaves of the tree. They look at the negative space. They look at the space between the leaves because there is discovery. We all look at the leaves, we all see the same thing. But when we look at the space between the leaves, the space between the branch and the trunk, when we look at the space around it in relation to other things around it, it opens our eyes to things we haven't seen before. And we don't go to, oh, I know, it's a tree. It's this kind, it's a pear tree, and it's a pear tree in bloom, and it has 6 pears hanging from it. We don't see that. We see other things. And that space, negative space is like water. When I talk about water and air, we have space all around us. You have a computer in front of you, you have books behind you, you have a window, you have a body, you have a chair, you have a lamp, but you have all that space around you. And most people think that that space is nothing. That space is everything. That space is filled and charged with all kinds of universal particles. So when we observe, it stimulates that part of us and parts of our brain that we don't use that get squished by too much thinking.
It makes me think of the creation, just like the beginning of everything, because there was nothing, right? And then God or the universe, whatever you believe in, source, created everything from nothing. So it's like we have that in us, that
Yes,
part of God where when we see emptiness, we think, well, what can we create?
yes. When we see space, because, I love when science and spirit marry. And, that they were separated eons ago, not eons ago, but I don't know what century, but they were separated. And the scientists who were into spirituality were condemned like witches, and terrible things happened to them. So they said, okay, okay, leave us alone and we'll just measure shit. We're just going to measure it and everything will be fine. Don't be killing us anymore. So they made this agreement. So the spiritualists became the witches, and the scientists measured, but they're born of each other. And Einstein, if you read Einstein, I mean, he talks about it all the time, and they come together really. And when you think about source and creation from nothing, you think about static, nothing, not even space, just a static, just which is kind of where you begin to reflect when you meditate, when you just, maybe for a quarter of a second, you're going to have a space that is without thought, which feels like a static. That's why I have a poem that says balanced on the tip of zero or something, which is the best way I could describe the impossible. But if you think of a static and you think of source as a static and I always think it was a thought. It was somehow out of that static came one thought, and out of that thought came separation and then explosion. My thinking was incoming and something came in and the static exploded into all these particles, and all of those particles were individual consciousnesses that are sourced from it. And it's that happened so long ago. Now we've become disconnected from the fact that we are all part of that source, and we are an expression of source. This is source's game, you know. We are part of the game. We are the game, and we are a source, and we are having this. And the third, I mean, this is a whole nother book, but the third dimension is not the only dimension. And the third dimension is a tricky one. And the higher dimension, it's not like one dimension's better than the other. This is a fourth dimension, fifth dimension, sixth dimension. It's not like they're better than the third dimension. They have different properties to them. And we line them up and talk about them in the third dimension in a certain kind of a way. But this is a tricky dimension because of the body and gravity, but mostly because of the body and the mind and how we've locked these things in. But also, if you want to go further out there a little bit, there are entities in many, many, many entities in other dimensions that are watching us, because what we get to do is feel. We get to feel in the third dimension in bodies. We get to feel, we get to have emotions, we get to have pain. We have all of these feelings. And when you disconnect from that and become a very high, you can create out of nowhere, boom, there's a planet, boom, you think it's there. When that occurs, you're not feeling. So there's certain dimensions where they, here's a planet, and then they blow up the planet because they don't care. There's no sense of loss in it. There's no feeling in it. So we don't necessarily want to completely evolve into that. Anyway, that gets a little far out there. If you want to stay within the book.
You talked about keeping things to yourself to build trust with your higher self. Oof, I love this topic. So I'm going to read just a part of it. If you feel compelled to talk about these personal experiences with others, take note of it and practice not having to say everything that's on your mind. When you keep your spiritual experiences private, a trust builds between you and your higher self. When you chit-chat about that which you find sacred, you diminish the power of your practice. You move out of the high frequency of experiencing and return to your personality's desire to impress. I've learned that lesson over and over.
Yeah, it's hard. It's like gossip. We have, the ego has a very strong desire to, but if you think about it, it's kind of like source reflecting itself with our experience, you know, then the ego wants to reflect itself by someone being impressed. So it's all a practice. Meditation is a practice, observation is a practice, you know, uh, not saying everything that crosses your mind is a practice, being sacred with yourself about certain things, treating them as sacred, certain ideas and beliefs, creates that space. I'm trying to grow the space of the heart, really, so that it becomes louder and louder. Many people say the heart is your second brain. It does, and they also say your stomach is your second brain, but your heart, has its own thinking, and it will grow. And that's one of the ways that you can exercise it and practice and help that space expand.
Yeah, something happens when you share something that's exciting, that's close to you with someone else. And it's one of those things that's difficult about this human experience, because when you have something that's very exciting to you, what you want to do is share it with somebody else.
Yes.
Yeah, and that tends to taint it in some way, depending on who you share it with.
Well, but also look at the power in sharing it with yourself, the most important person, to honoring it with, like, wow, that's real self-love. It is understanding that you're giving yourself that.
Mhm.
That's between me, and I'm giving. That's a way of giving to myself.
Yeah.
And you know it more. Then once you say it to somebody else, it has to be filtered through the thinking.
Mhm.
Whereas if you hold it close to your heart, it's in the knowing area. I know this to be true. And then the the way to, it's gratitude, is you thank the universe for the creation of the thought or the thing that you hold so dear, and the strength and wisdom to know that the only way to keep it from the ego diminishing it is to hold it close to yourself. And you can be grateful for that in your thoughts and prayers. which is a communication, a very strong communication.
Yeah. And it seems like it doesn't even matter what it is, whether it's has to do with relationships or a business idea or something that you want to paint. I mean, you don't, as long as you can keep it close, the better until it's born, until you can give birth to it and then say, okay, it's done. Now it's ready to be shared.
Yes. Yeah. Give birth to it and put it into the expression, whether it's the choice in the acting in the character or the painting or the expressive dance or form of writing, you know, those are those discoveries that you're like, who can I tell? When you hold to yourself and you work with them, how do you want to be expressed? When I was writing the book, the working with it was to just sit every day and say, okay, I'm listening. There's there's a wonderful, wonderful story about a poet, and I'm afraid I don't know her name, but she's not the only artist who talked about this. But the story, she was in the field. This came from a wonderful speaker, and I'll think of her name. She wrote Big Magic. Who's the one who wrote Big Magic? I have her book up there. Gilbert. Melissa Gilbert. Anyway, she told this story on a TED talk about this poet, and the woman was sort of out in the field. She lived on a farm, and she could feel this poem coming in, like rolling across the fields toward her, and she took off running to the house to get a paper and pencil to write it down. And she said sometimes she would get there in time and that would come out in one whole piece. And sometimes it would go past her. One time it went past her and she grabbed it kind of by the tail and started writing, and the poem came out backwards. And she said, and sometimes I couldn't get there in time and it would just roll on to the next poet listening. And there are songwriters who have described the very same thing. Tom Petty, very same, driving in the car and, you know, pulling into a motel and saying, I got to check in. I need a paper and pen. I got to get this song. And then it rolled by. He couldn't grab it. And he recognized it. Oh,
Heard-
I had sound so familiar to me. I think that was rolling around in my. So that's space. Again, look at it. They're talking about it's rolling in through space.
Mhm.
This is intelligence coming in through space, inspiration coming through space, heart connected to source and drawing in something that you are waiting to discover, the art, the song, the piece of writing.
Okay. Fear and emotions. Unless we learn to regulate our own frequency by making choices that uplift us, we will find ourselves at the mercy of our emotions. When we're at the mercy of our emotions, we fall easy prey to those who wish to instill fear, insecurity, and confusion as a means to manipulate and control. By regulating our own frequency through our choices, are we able to avoid those who wish to instill fear and to control?
Well, first of all, we have to recognize that. We're in the process of that big time right now in the United States of America. We have been highly manipulated by not just one, both sides, the media, really. And the media is just, if it sells, you know, sell it. Car crashes. I mean, where I, where is the good news? There's lots of good news, but no, let's have as much blood, as much fear, as much, this is what's happening. You're being controlled. And blah, blah, blah. It's all a lot of bullshit. You don't know anything from that. Know from your heart. You have to listen to your own self, or we're never going to get out of this mess. And it doesn't help to say I'm right and you're wrong, or take sides. It doesn't help. It's all a matter of, I'm being the awareness that scares me. Why does that scare me? Because the intention is to scare me. There's nothing scary about that. The intention is to disturb me, to scare me, to make me feel a certain way that, now, you can whisper into, let me help that feeling with, here's how I'm going to mess you up and then I'm going to help you. It's, so what was your question? How do we get out of that?
Well, if we regulate our own frequency, so if we, which
Yeah,
we can talk about how to do that. I mean, we
yes.
did a little bit, but,
But there's more way. I mean, if you regulate your own frequency, first of all, it means that you believe that you can. It means that in the depths of your tears and your victimhood, you believe you could choose to look at this situation in a different way. And just it begins with that. And once you do that, then you go, oh, okay, well, how could I look at that? What are the other ways I could look at it? And you begin to open the area and you begin to examine and observe things from your own point of view. And in so doing, observing, you're going to raise your frequency. And when you get to the and the universe will help you with this. The minute you go from victim to, wait a minute, what else is going on here? It will begin to help you because that is a higher consciousness. That is a higher way. We will always rise. The cream rises to the top. So once you give up the negative, you recognize, oh, I'm just being very judgmental about all of this. I wonder why, what's going on there? And you start asking questions, things will come in and enlighten you and thereby raise your frequency. And it starts with just making the decision to change your point of view or to open your mind and observe some things. Right there, boom, your frequency goes up. Another way to keep your frequency high is to, I have an exercise called Joy List, where you write down all the things that bring you joy, which goes back to, I wish we started that in the first grade. And if we just encouraged people to do that, make a list of the things that bring you joy, and bring you joy means that something reverberates in you, that frequency is lifted. You go, I love to play tennis. Every time I play tennis, I feel like this. I love Pilates. I just love it to pieces. So when I get ill, I want to go back to Pilates, and it helps me heal because I love it. And so even if I take it down to one weight and I go very easy and I'm doing the breathing, and within 3 days all the weights are back on and I'm building my strength. That's one of the things on my joy list. We all have different ones, but if you incorporate that into your daily activities, you will be raising your frequency, particularly if you're aware of it. I'm going to raise my frequency by doing these positive things and thinking in this positive way. And daily meditation helps you do that.
now we've raised our frequency. Do those people who want to instill fear and who want to control us, do those characters start to fall away?
I don't know. I don't know. I can't be responsible for them, but I'm not going to be affected by them in the same way. And the higher frequency is going to organize and handle that better. I don't think of them that they're gonna go away, or there's no battle to be had. There's just, you can only do the job of yourself. That's ultimately what the book is about. One by one, we must become an artist and use our life as our first masterpiece. If one by one we do that, the culture will begin to look very different.
A fantasy is safe because it involves the impossible or the improbable. It doesn't disturb or insist. It is designed to pacify like a lollipop. A dream is unsafe because it involves the heart. It is a cherished aspiration, ambition, or ideal, and as such, It demands action. The heart knows that realizing a dream risks failure. If the person is too afraid of failing, they will bury their dream. Sometimes they keep it a secret, even from themselves. Is there ever a productive or a meaningful time to have a fantasy?
I think again, if you're aware that
Hmm.
it's a fantasy, they're very close to each other, and maybe daydreaming and fantasy is a practice for dreaming. And again, it has to do with awareness. This came out of, actors are daydreamers. They daydream like crazy. They're gonna get the Academy Award. They're gonna, and they cannot work. They're just so happy to have that daydream. It's a little masturbatory, really. It's just something that you do to give yourself pleasure, but little gets done. And you can tell because they fantasize themselves in somebody else. I want to be an actor like so and so, and I want to work with all the best directors and the best movies and the best, highest budgets and all of this jazz. But they're not in it. They're not seeing themselves in it. If you look at, groundbreaking artists like Madonna, she wasn't following anyone. She saw this. You can tell she saw this. She had a whole image for herself, how she dressed, how she acted, how she sang, how she would make an impact, what kind of music, the sound, the production. She saw that. So that's very different than someone else who comes along and says, I want to have a career like Madonna. Um, and it takes courage. It takes education, it takes encouragement to and teaching someone this is a fantasy, this is the dream of your heart. It takes acknowledging that they're different and the courage to follow through with what that dream will demand of you. And I have this acting intensive coming up in January, and I piloted, I do a lot of private work, career counseling, to help people focus on what their dream is and, what kind of productive activities they can do to bring that about, troubleshooting the problems, of what's standing in their way. I do a lot of that work. And I want to bring it to larger groups because privates are very expensive and my students can't afford to hire me privately. So this acting intensive is the same. They rehearse for months. They put up scenes that are absolutely complete with lights and sounds and sets and everything. But I had only three, but I had three written exercises for them. The first was to capture that dream in one paragraph that was very succinct. And I was like underlined it 1,000, one paragraph. I have many students and I'm going to read these and I don't want a thesis, because otherwise they would write me, 5 pages and here's the psychology that's standing in my way and lots of psychology standing in their way. All this otherness, other than what if you could have anything in the world, barring all obstacle, what would that be? Simple, but the hardest question in the world. So when they get it down, I gave them a month to get it down to one paragraph. Then it's like, what can I do on a daily basis to achieve that dream? So that was the second part. And I gave them a month and I made them write a daily action for an entire month, 5 a week, So there was 20 things they'd done. And it was very interesting because what they'd done would be I rehearsed, I read this play, I saw this movie because I was researching this and I exercised and you know this is not what I had in mind. The third exercise, I mean, all of those things are good and all those things you need to do for yourself, but and it all applies to your dream, sort of. But what are you going to do to achieve the dream of working with Martin Scorsese, or working, getting a guest starring role in a television show, or, what is that specific thing? So the third exercise is, they have to go back for the whole year before and write up everyone they met in every audition, every job they booked, and everyone they met who was involved with that job, and make that list. Then they have to go and find their information, their email or their snail mail, which I love snail mail because people don't use it anymore, and it's wonderful to get things in the mail. And that takes creativity and resourcefulness. And then that's their contact list. And then they have to begin to create creative correspondence where they put themselves in mind of those people. So every time they work, they send out a thing, or if you've actually worked with a person, you can send something saying, I saw a tree today and thought of you, or I thought of you today and remembered this moment that we had together. It's just that. It's just bringing yourself to mind and that connection, making that connection through space, making that connection. So those are the kinds of things, if you want a career in Hollywood, this is the nature of Hollywood. I didn't you're not going to change the nature of Hollywood. Hollywood's going in a certain direction. You can change the nature of Hollywood with the quality of your work, but you have to get that work, whether you're a writer. I work with writers, whether you're a writer, trying to sell a series or a script, or whatever it is. Once you get it, you can make some changes, but to get it takes this other kind of work, a very specific kind of work. And that's the difference and that takes courage to realize your dream. Otherwise, you'd fantasize and it gives you a lot of pleasure, but you don't have to do anything about it. And because it's not going to go anywhere. You know what I mean? I know actors who've been fantasizing about their careers for 20 freaking years, and they've booked 4 roles because they haven't really done anything to bring, so the universe is waiting. It's not coming in. It's not going to call you up on the phone. It's not going to find you at Schwab's, at the counter at Schwab's like they did in the 1930s with Lana Turner. It's not going to happen that way.
Maybe on TikTok.
I don't think so.
I'm just teasing.
And not on Instagram either. It's quality. It's the quality of your communications. It's the quality of your dream.
Mhm.
It has to do with quality, and that's something that individuals can do a lot to elevate, because I'm the most concerned about quality right now.
Well, I know you wrote this meaning for, actors and actresses and writers and of that sort, but it could really be read by anyone. And there's so much in here that's valuable, for anyone who wants to read it. And I do have 2 final questions for you, but before I ask them, is there anything that we did not cover that you feel you'd like to
A couple of
share?
things I wanted to tell you. One is the cover. Do you know where the cover is inspired from?
It looks very familiar. It's a famous artwork, isn't it?
Yes. It's from the Cave of Hands. It's 60,000 years old. It's from a cave in Patagonia, Argentina, and it's prehistoric. And I'm so struck by it because it's man's first impulse to say, I am here. I am here. And they express themselves on the cave wall with the stencils. They took clay and water and blue color around their hands, but it's the first artwork. And so that it just knocks me out. I just look at it and it moves me. I'd like to go and see those in person sometime. So I wanted to talk about that. Because I'm very taken by how the depth of your receptivity to the ideas in the book. I mean, I'm really moved by what you brought up in the book. It's beautiful. Um, and the fact that I wanted to write it for everybody. I wanted to write it to say there's an artist in you. There's an artist in everyone, and this will encourage and elevate your thinking to that artist. That your life is a masterpiece and you're responsible for creating
You did it.
it. I
You
did
did
it
a
for
great
you.
job.
I did it for you. Thank you. Thank you.
Jocelyn, what is your number one health tip? So whether it's mindset, diet, nutrition, physical, emotional, spiritual, the number one tip you would like everyone to know.
I believe it's really being happy with your choices in life. And if you have joy and gratitude in your choices, you're going to come from a healthy place.
For our final question together, you get to choose a number 1 through 100, and that will correlate to your question.
Oh, 22.
22. How do you stay resilient in the face of adversity?
Observation. I observe the adversity so that I can choose how to deal with it.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. This has been really lovely, and thank you for writing the book. I wouldn't have, if we didn't book this, I wouldn't have read it, and I'm so happy that all of this happened and I did, and yeah, I'm just so happy that I also get to share it with the world, and more people will hopefully, get their hands on it.
Well, thank you for finding me. It's not an accident. We meet the people we're meant to meet in the world. You're so luminous. The entire interview I've wanted to say, you're so beautiful and luminous. So I'll just say it now.
Thank you. I think there's too many ring lights. I'm not used to recording this at this time.
Well, it's been a complete pleasure. I love your journey. I love what you're doing. And I love that you found me and we had this wonderful time together.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. That means a lot. And please, if you enjoyed this interview with Jocelyn Jones, make sure you check out the description. Everything will be linked there and you can learn more, and have a beautiful day.
And you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.